The next part for us to look at is the deltoid. There's a couple of things that we need to know about the deltoid before we get started, because they're not set on our model just yet. One of them is you really need to be clear with the acromion process. So we have our clavicle, we have the spine of the scapula, but what I really want to emphasize, I'm going to make it in blue, is that there is a very distinct backward slope to the acromion process that I haven't put into my model just yet. And it could be even more extreme than what we've got going right here. Just a tiny bit. Let's undo a little bit. Let's take it down about like this. So what this is going to do is help me really get the sense of the deltoid muscle itself. Because now what we have to keep in mind is that there are essentially three origins. We're going to have the acromion process, a third of the clavicle, and then the spine of the scapula. And those are all going to come together to insert roughly halfway down the humerus. So let's fix all that up and make sure we're in the right position. I'm going to go back to my skeleton. And I'm going to switch to draw, the move brush, make sure perspective is off. Just make sure that angle is right. You might need to come in with your trapezius and adjust that. It's really as simple as just moving it back and forth a few times. And for spinatus, make sure it's inserting in the right place. Okay. Back into our skeleton. Okay. Make sure we turn all of those settings back to normal. Spine of the scapula, acromion process, clavicle connecting to that. Okay. Now, from a top view, again, let me reiterate this. We're talking about three origins, one insertion. The insertion is halfway down the humerus, and we're going to need to be pulling the muscles in. Now, if I was to say, take a look at this first portion, the spine of the scapula, you'll want to be mindful of the fact that there is a portion of this that's relatively thin. And then the rest of it, which is where the muscle starts to kick in. So as you start to draw these muscles, don't just think muscle. Just like we saw with the latissimus dorsi, there is a portion of it that's thin, and the muscles underneath it are a larger part of its shape. So those are the things that we want to kind of keep in mind. All right, now to get these guys, we're going to use the infraspinatus, duplicate it. I'm going to call this the deltoid. Go into shadow box, control, click and drag. Drop out of solo mode, transparency is on. And what I do in this case is really just create a simple shape. I'm going to come from the spine of the scapula. Let's make sure mask pin is active. down to roughly halfway in the humerus, and I just measure on my screen. I'm going to pull out from the acromion process with a nice arc. Follow the spine of the scapula. Fill that area in. So that's really my front and my back profile. Now I need to come into a side view. Follow along the spine of the scapula. Come in. And just fill in the space between them. Spine of the scapula, acromion process, 1/3 of the clavicle, halfway to the humerus. We're going to now, as we sculpt, get in and start to break this up. Let's come into the front, do a quick check. Feel like I want to make sure that this is pulling up there. That might cause me some problems in the back. Let's see if I can solve those. Yeah. Drop out a shadow box. So quite a simple shape. Trim dynamic is really going to help us round the corners, and that's all I'm going to do right off the bat. Then I'm going to come into the back, and in that section I mentioned, where we're largely talking about just a thin portion for the deltoid, I'm going to use trim dynamic and just flatten. Okay, take a look at this from a side view. And really start to cut in. I'm pushing in because this is a female, trying to keep a very clean back plane. Don't forget to keep this as much of a clean plane as possible. That's one of the things we learned with the base mesh. And then break that a bit. Come into the front. And let's talk about a really important distinction here between the different insertions and origins. So one thing that we need to know about the clavicular portion is that this is going to swing in and drop short of the origin. It's going to pull in and have some great form, but it doesn't really continue all the way down, or at least the muscle doesn't continue all the way down. What does continue is the tendon. The rest of this is what's known as the acromial section. This is attaching or originating from the acromion process, and the meat of this is really the bulk of the entire deltoid. So let's get in and make sure that we've got the clavicular portion outlined. So following what I just said, I'm going to push in a little bit on the clavicular section. Trim dynamic is good. Okay. Might be wise to turn transparency on even so low to really just be able to get that back area. Okay, transparency's off. I'm going to separate the acromion section from the clavicular. And then check it from a side view, and there. Notice that we are talking about having the shape of the curve and the high point of that curve anyways higher up and then dwindle down. So now let's take a look at the acromion section. So here's our origin. It's going to pull out, follow along the humerus. It's going to drop down and cover this entire area. Now, a couple of important things to keep in mind. The muscles along the acromion section, or the acromial part, are a bit braided. So you want to be looking for how these come together. And one of the things that you'll really notice is from the back view, the muscle is definitely rotating forward, so you're getting this distinct pattern of the muscle coming forward. We're going to actually put that into our sculpt a bit. I'm going to use the magnify brush. Just swell some form, trim dynamic, clay brush, and build from the back. You can really see this in sculptures by Richard McDonald. You'll really see the muscle right here in the back. It's almost like he has this nice design element sweeping forward. So it's good to keep that. Okay. This section as well in the back, we can cut this off to the spine of the scapula, the acromial section covering most of this. So we just want to move brush, maybe even move brush with AccuCurve on. And get a little bit of a lilt forward, just like that. I like the AccuCurve. That just does a really wonderful job. Okay. In with clay. Get that wrapping around. Trim dynamic to just thin it. And there we go. So it's a bit of an intellectual representation. There's a lot that we need to think about and cover. Does it have this much bulk? Depends on your character, but I'm going to use the move brush and just move it in. Okay, there we go. And then now let's fill this with red wax. M, fill object. And from this point forward, it actually might make sense for us to just fill the skeleton with matte cap gray, and for us to be working with red wax on anytime we use shadow box. But I don't like to use shadow box with this material, so we'll just see how that goes. I'm using the move. Oops. Make sure I have the deltoid selected, and I'm just going to push that in. This is all going to get pushed in and just hidden. And let's take a look at everything else. Cool. We're ready to keep moving on with our model. And so now, as we're focusing on the front here, one of the next things that we'll probably want to take a look at is the pectoral muscle.